Here's a scenario. A man is drowning at a public resort. It's entirely his fault, and you know this. Now, you are the lifeguard in this story, and it is your duty to save him. What if I told you your solution to this predicament was to paddle your rescue board near the drowning man and offer him words rather than a helping hand? You know, really give him a piece of your mind while he drowns there like an idiot. So tell me, why do lifeguards decide not to take this route? Even if, let's say, they could get away with any liability. A lifeguard understands that their duty isn't about prestige. They are placed there because life needs people who have the patience to help those less fortunate. How is this related to gamers then? I think it's pretty obvious that there is a hostile divide within the gaming community, and the value of games isn't improving. Even though one side of the aisle has a bigger population than the other, it's clear which side is responsible for making a difference. But did you know that this chasm is man-made? And it isn't a matter of quarantine either. The side that bears the fruit of gaming's inception might be considered healthy, but the issues found on the other side turn out to be airborne. So we drew our lines in the sand, but we'll all expire the same in the end. You see, what we really need is an eagerness to make the crossing, ripping out the weeds from the foundation located on the other side. For these weeds will affect us all, and their growth will not stop because harsh words are cast upon them. The only advantage the healthy side has is that they can identify the weeds, unlike those who live amongst them. There is a problem, however. The older generation of gamers has a mindset that encourages them to mope in the dark. So let's shine some light on that. Okay, so why do we have a problem with the baby boomers? Just so we stay on topic, I'm only going to focus on the issue of biased expectations. Because each generation has some degree of ethics, right? Something we, the next in line, are supposed to heed. You know, what made kinship work is the tight-knit tapestry each bloodline worked on together. So let's wind it back before it became just a heap of thread on the floor. The era the baby boomers grew up in owes a great deal to the benefits their parents brought back from the spoils of war. In turn, they were the only generation who really knew the gains of peacetime. So what did they do with all that borrowed time? Not souring their minds with thoughts about the future. That was our job. But dare not object, lest we forget how they were raised right. It is easier to recite the lines rather than know why they are spoken. But the words certainly had a nice ring when their parents spoke them, so why not say them a couple thousand more times? So what were we to do? Survive, of course. And for many, the easiest thing to do was to sell their souls for a lighter tomorrow. The world we were left with had all but blurred the definition of titles, so it's no wonder we clamber over each other just to stand out in a crowd. Of course, the baby boomers already reside at the top, so it requires little effort to turn up their noses at us. You can see how it can be difficult to take care of our seniors, when they demand their dues based on actions that seem to have only left ramifications. The ethos of a baby boomer is not peculiar. It will crop up again, and it already has. Those that were influenced by the era that emerged between the 90s and the 2010s have taken on a similar outlook of enmity. During those 20 or so years, the overarching gaming industry knew no regulations or the oversight from shareholders. Games were made, and unanimity was briefly thought to be true. But the gamers did not think to protect the medium they loved, taking a moment to set their controllers down and lobby for rights and protections. Did they not see the overreach that happened in the film industry during the video nasty debacle, or when the MPAA clamped down on movies? No, video games were impervious, and were a commodity that was bestowed upon them alone. Of course, they like to put themselves amongst the ranks of the best, but it's more likely that those vocal today were lucky if they even caught a glimpse of the greats. Just because you are still around doesn't mean you have inherited some degree of resilience from the past. The atmosphere the older generation has created does not tolerate delays. So what is a modern gamer to do when they are already years behind? We take what we can get, looking for adequate tutors that will take us in. It's only natural that you become lenient towards bad behaviors when those exhibiting them are the only ones who give you a chance. Anyone can afford to be an ass if they are propped up by the experience of living within a strong community. But why should we care for a Michelin rating when we know you have retired from the act of consuming years ago? Had your method been implemented from the outset, you would have never gotten a foot in the door in the first place. Fortunately, we have history to tide us over these confusing times. Of course, nothing will ever be one-to-one, but our ancestors did not die trying only to get nothing. Was it not people who made the decisions in the past, just the same as today? And if you were to ask them, I bet they wouldn't suggest inviting catastrophes. People should not rely on past deliverances to serve as a constant avenging angel throughout time. It's not as if we're the only ones studying the events that occurred in 1983. The opposition does not sit by idly while news of an incoming crash is on the horizon. If the industry is to crash again, despite all the securities that have been placed there, we'll be going back to 1970 and not the whimsical 2000s. Right back to the drawing board. If you don't have the patience for indie games, then how much tolerance will you have for the future? Yes, Nintendo quickly reinvigorated the market back in 1983, but are you seriously going to try and convince me they are the saviors in this developing story? Last time I checked, they were in the shitter as well. I mean, how much money does the video game industry generate these days? Something like 200 billion a year? A market that large works in big strides. So if you want a more appropriate comparison for what you're praying for, let me give you 3 dates. 1946 Hungary, 1994 Yugoslavia, and 1923 Germany. And how did the average customer fare during those times? The big companies certainly didn't have much of a problem. In most cases, they were debt-free, ready to exploit a fractured infrastructure. But the customer was reduced to a mere animal, as they no longer had any financial assurances. Many commodities that were once considered valuable were discarded, replaced with more immediate needs. Yet one of the worst things that happened was the loss of framework, as now the future of these nations was in the hands of bidding wars and outsiders. What will we fall back on during the crash, when the rotten companies already own all the gaming licenses? Convince me of this. How can you claim to still have a genuine opinion when you've already made your point 100 times over? Reviews should not be treated like they belong on Snapchat. And even in that case, what goes on the internet stays on the internet. Once you've made your point regarding a broader topic, why feel the need to repeat it? Do you not respect your own work? Let me break this down. You can generally have a critique based on 5 topics: an organization, for example a gaming company, a genre, be it in gaming or elsewhere, a series, a culture, such as the fanbase, and an industry, along with all the technical aspects involved. So that's one solid video on each one of those topics. And how long does a fashion motif last? A decade? You can see, based on this model, how a lot of things on the internet are excessive. If you don't adhere to something along these lines, your words mean little, because after that, it's your wallet that has all the sway. And even if you don't buy any of these modern games, you are nonetheless giving them power by offering them the attention they need to spread. Don't chant the name, else give it power. I mean, just put this in a real-world context. In what scenario would you ever be goaded into critiquing a turd someone just dumped into the local toilet? The principle of touching the poo should not only apply to lolcows, because it seems to me like it's true elsewhere also. But this would be an incomplete story if I were to just blame one side. Believe me, we share a great deal of crimes of our own, and it only took us half the amount of time to do them. So I agree, any effort exerted won't mean much if my generation just refuses the offer. What would help us all is if we could come to an academic understanding as to why modern gamers decide to live in a noxious environment. Although it could be argued that I have an incomplete picture, indecision is a far worse crime I could be committing at this moment. We opened our eyes for the first time, and what did we see? Ruins. Ugly to the sight, these ruins seem to only get in the way of progress. Once the cradle of civilization, self-evident by the overcrowded population that resided within them. But despite our instinct to leave, we stayed to listen until we sensed their power. The local dunes had crashed against the pillars, yet you could hardly tell by looking at their base. These monuments did not crumble because of time. Instead, they were betrayed by the people who were housed inside. The lifeblood had been scraped off, so that it could be draped over the clothes of those who wanted to retain power. So why do most stay when we are ruled by dandies? Many have tried to leave their embrace, but doing so would mean building a foundation on sand. For it seems that the monuments have the only power to fight the hourglass, And when we stopped expanding their borders, that is when we doomed ourselves to the desert. Wanting to belong should be classified as a Schedule II drug. Except, most of us find ourselves suffering from withdrawal before we even know any sort of high. We caught a whiff of something wonderful, and that's all it took to make us a useful addict. Born not knowing the extent of camaraderie until we saw it being sold in the local storefront. The hidden persuasion that converts many an ordinary person into a gamer is the promise of a home. For even in the pursuit of separation, what one ultimately seeks is a place where they will be understood. Video games have a funny way of fulfilling that itch, which once brought large crowds together quite easily. It's quite commonly known that games are more fun with friends, but the banality of this assumption allows the core truth it contains to hide right under our noses while we try to sniff out a solution. Those games of old we recognize today all went through a metamorphosis, brought forth by the people they gathered. To state the obvious, you can't exactly maintain a domain as large as video games by your lonesome. The final form a series takes is more akin to ecstasis, which you can easily lose if it's not maintained. That serenity old games created was the product of equilibrium between the game and the gamer. Many are fooled into thinking you can separate one from the other. You can serve me sliced bread, but I'll never know its value until it's made into a sandwich. A functional game community would invite herbivores to roost in its realm. For a product to pass the sniff test, one must be able to envision the middle. We did, after all, find a way to create new third places, albeit temporarily. But those born too late mistook echoes for invitations, and when we followed them, we were met by an impasse. If you find yourself going on a pilgrimage, where you will inevitably sacrifice things about yourself to be able to keep going, you will try your best not to fill your mind with doubts. And on the summit of that impasse is where you will find toxic positivity festering. But what kind of a mind willingly stops, all for a chance to earn the favor of chimeras? I find it so bizarre that even though we have one media after another about the coming of age aspect, we are learning less and less about how to grow up. Looking at the data, having a phase seems to be pretty normal for young adults, so I don't think persecuting that behavior would lead to any meaningful results. The problem is denial. Practice makes perfect, but excessive layering does not make it true. There is a point within an entertainment industry where media is created not because it's niche, but because the audience wishes to deny that it no longer exists. So when you tell a coming-of-age story, for example, you're not doing it because you have expertise on the matter, but rather because you wish to convince yourself of a lie. I am reminded of the many shows that lingered past their prime. You would think self-preservation would kick in, causing the entire audience to leave collectively after seeing the writing on the wall. Yet so often, even after a show cannibalizes itself and is then cancelled, you can find crowds loitering around its grave, speaking as if it's still alive and present. Each one of those individuals loitering likely comes from a similar place. A place where they were forced to learn how to swim and learned how to enjoy drowning instead. Why engage with things past your time? Because you never really experienced them in the first place. The fervor these crowds exude, spurred from their waterlogged minds, can easily attract new fish into its net, only for these recruits to be caught by a death grip and forced down under with the rest. Passion is the folly of the young. But it's true, a drowned corpse will float to the surface, yet this is never a sign of life. Here's a funny story about our great leader, Comrade Kim Jong-il. We are to believe that under the doctrine of communism, only things made within the state are truly authentic and good. To walk beyond the border of the protective umbrella of Marxism is akin to stepping into a plague-infested land. Communism is the cure for mankind, and the disease is Western ideals. Inoculate yourself or suffer under ignorance. But dictators often seem to need to ship in foreign influence in bulk to feel fulfilled within their domain. A 700,000 annual Hennessy cognac spending, for example, along with a personal chef from Japan of all places, and pleasure squads more akin to an imperial harem. Typical socialist behavior. In a similar vein, we had our own degree of re-education. Despite having a golden age for Hollywood westerns, by the time we got to spaghetti westerns, the American frontier was to be remembered as a tragedy. The image of the cowboy was thoroughly soured, and as our landscape got more intense, you might as well be clicking your heels whenever you don a Stetson. You ask a progressive layman what we are to think about that time period, and they will recite the 3 Ds: denounce, disassemble, discard. But visit your local barber today and ask them what they are playing, and you'll likely hear them reply, Red Dead Redemption 2. A game where ingratiating yourself in the Wild West is unavoidable. But there's another story being told here that goes beyond Rockstar Games. For had Red Dead Redemption been any shorter, it's likely politics would have taken hold. Why does it resonate, despite the contrary, even to the mass audience? Simple. The same reason why Stockholm Syndrome is a thing. You spend enough time with someone, and you might just think they're your friend. And how much value do you think companionship has in the gaming market? On one side, you have a cohort of Scrooges, and on the other, a gaggle of proles. Both negative terms for an equally dysfunctional community. You can see, based on that terminology, how I'm not interested in an execution. We all have thorns digging into our backs, and if we want them removed, we'll have to drop our guard and allow them to be seen. Help is always wanted. People just don't know how to request it. One statement is true about all of this. Sacrifices will have to be made. But that has always been true. We have just denied it by placing luxuries in our line of sight. A healthy community should never cease to wrestle with peril, for peril is opportunistic rather than dormant. And it only takes one well-placed strike for peril to win and watch you bleed out. Really, all of this comes from my issue of seeing people run in circles to avoid facing risk. Uglier yet, it has become my mantra for success. I get it, right? Taking a piss on the same problem guarantees engagement. Yet I wonder if anyone has ever bothered to think about the long-term ramifications. Not just for gaming, but for your own channel as well. If I were to take who you present yourself as and try to summarize it from a neutral perspective, how many words do you think I could use before I find myself repeating? So modern games suck, right? What is your appropriate contrast to be able to prove that? Measuring despair always requires a counterbalance for it to have weight. If you're using a gaming landmark as that contrast, you are woefully ignorant of what attracts people to a subgenre. Genres live and die by the flow of the audiences it caters to, and you're out here trying to seal away the river. I might agree with you at the beginning regarding the glaring problems, but if you pin that to your chest, it's hard not to question your integrity. If you actually have a stake in this race, you should know that you can trust someone more based on what they like rather than on what they hate. Instead of waging war with the river, consider digging a better channel so it flows your way. To make us whole again, we will have to learn how to cherish modesty. Video games will always have problems. What we shouldn't have problems with is remaining obscure. But within that obscurity, we must behave as if our actions are responsible for the well-being of a greater body. A body that no one community or subgroup can ever possess. And you ask why modern social networks suck. Just look at the old internet. The blogs might have been known for being crass, but when you boil it down, modesty prevailed. Despite it all, we should always prepare for the future. I spoke of peril, and some days I think I can smell blood too. But we can face this future together and share the blood we lost. I will not solely speak of triumph, for there can be no triumph until we understand the extent of our ability. We have already laid the groundwork for a certain future, so even if we fix course, we must brave the road we chose before we get on the right track again. To some relief, the repercussions of the winds of change can be foreseen. It is just a matter of articulating their dealings. And I know no better way than doing so with a bit of prose. My world is cacophonous. My respite, silence. Deep inside the undergrowth, I did not find it. Hidden within a library, I did not find it. Intertwined in tradition, I did not find it. I waited until the world finally rested, covered in a sheet of snow. There I sat in my dreary room until even the sun fell into a deep slumber, yet the tapping, ever so rapping, persisted even now. Called forth by the dinner bell, the visitor sat just beyond my windowsill. For while I searched for silence, I had trapped its adversary within flesh and bone. And the raven, ever so patient, would always pursue the wail coming from the cradle. The very same raven who had tormented many authors and poets had come now to reap my melody. But although the raven perched there on the ledge, I knew it was more shade than feather. So as I threw open my window, my words were instead cast beyond, towards the Plutonian shores, so that it might reach their intended master. There I spoke my piece, sharing the grievances I had gathered within my mind. Would it know the answers, I wondered, for what's to come to our beloved? The image has been tarnished, the experience soured, but can it all be redeemed one day with just the right prompt? And the raven said, nevermore. A great archive has been built that could take any one man a lifetime to experience. Can we use that to restore it to its former glory? And the raven said, nevermore. Imitators and agents of deceit have taken over the fields and sown malice wherever they go. Can we reclaim what was once wonderful so that the sun can shine down once again? And the raven said, nevermore. Many words have been spoken, but regret was always slow to follow. Can we at least recant what we have meant and bring the discourse back to its intended path? And all the raven said was, nevermore. And a great wind blew into my home, carrying the raven and all it promised with it. And the raven, never relenting, invited in by my lamenting, was soon lost within my home. And a melody would gently rise beneath every dark corner, so that it could drown all else within. And death was in the air forevermore.